it's David. Let's put these Sportster Sport forks back together once and for all. Now, I think I took these forks apart back about 5 months ago, so it's really overdue to get them back together because it's the first step on the actual Sportster rebuild project. I've been sucked into other projects. They're starting to pull together now to come to a close, so it's time to get back onto the Sportster and take the first steps in getting it back on the road. Right, so let's start by looking at what we've got. First things first, we have the manual, always useful. We've got the fork legs, which I chose to respray in the end. One of the reasons I chose to respray them is it's a relatively non-invasive thing to do. You can always take the paint back off, so it's not really a big deal. So they've been painted and lacquered. We've got the fork internals, which will need to be cleaned up. I've got my tool to put it back together. We've got O-rings, fork seals, hopefully we've got everything there. I've got new fork stanchions to replace the old pitted ones that were ripping up the fork seals. I've got the old fork springs, the standard fork springs, and I've got a Hyperpro upgrade kit for the fork springs. Now this I bought in 2015, so I've had this upgrade kit for 3 years. Let's just check. And I bought it obviously long before I took these apart. So let's actually have a look. So those springs are about 410. They're about 16¼ inches. So they are still within spec as being perfectly okay to use. So these will be put aside and kept if I ever want to go back to them rather than the Hyperpro ones. Let's put aside everything that we're not going to be using. Create some space. And let's have a look what's included in this Hyperpro kit. Right, fork oil, 2.5, that's really thin for forks, but it's what they recommend. I don't know what Harley uses other than calling it Type E. Some packing, stickers, more stickers, not quite sure what that's for. Guess I should read those. And the springs themselves. Big box for little springs. So let's compare these to the stock ones. So the first thing to know is they are shorter than the stock springs, and in fact that's shorter than the minimum distance on the stock springs, but also they're visibly stiffer. Wire looks very similar, maybe a little bit thinner on the Hyperpro, but we've got a much longer tightly wound section, whereas these you can see are relatively soft and squishy. They've got a long section of open coils, whereas this has got quite a short section of open coils and then a much tighter, much tougher, more resistant spring. So let's see how those goes. Let's clear this up and I can have a quick read through the manual and see if there's anything that we need to know. The important things that we need to know are here on the front of the manual, so we'll get to those when we get to that stage. But first things first, let's actually have a look at what we've got and do some cleaning. So this is the internals of the right hand fork, and I know it's a right hand fork because it's got the pinch bolt for here, which the other one doesn't have. So we've got the cover, we've got the dust seal, we've got the retaining clip, I'm guessing that, I can't remember what that's called, the actual seal itself, the spacer. We've got this bushing which goes on the bottom of the fork leg, and we've got the top bushing which goes with the seal, and we have the adjuster for the bottom of the fork leg. Now some of these are going to be thrown away, all these are going to be changed. I'm hoping I've got the new parts for them, and the rest needs cleaning up. Now one of the things we need to do is to replace the O-rings that we've got on here. There's an O-ring in there, and there's some O-rings in here, so this we will need to take apart. So let's just check what we have. So we've got the new dust cap, and now let's find out whether or not we actually got the right part for the bike. So we have retaining clip, we have an oil seal, which looks good, we have a new spacer, don't think anything wrong with it with the old one, but I don't have any new guide bushings, which I would have liked to replace. I'm going to have to, yeah, that really needs replacing. So I'm going to be a bit stuck. I'm not going to be able to put this together until I've actually got those guide bushings. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to clean stuff up. I'm going to fit the O-rings and assemble it as far as we can, but then we're going to have to go on pause until I can get new bushings. So O-rings. Now the only O-ring I can see on this bottom adjuster is this one here. Other than that, it doesn't seem to come apart. There might be a roll pin in there. If there is, I don't see any obvious way of removing it to see if there's something else inside. So we can replace this one with this removed from the damper tube. There are actually a couple of O-rings inside here, so we are going to need to take it apart. First, pay attention to the actual adjustment you've currently got on it, which in this case it would be probably on, looks like it's about on the third ring. Unfortunately I don't have a spanner big enough to hold this while I do this. This proved, or is proving, a bit of a challenge. It's not so bad now. It's quite corroded down in here. It's alloy on alloy. As I'm unscrewing, I can see tiny little bits of alloy corrosion falling out of the top here, and it really was quite stiff at the start, and it still is. It's freeing up a little bit now. I don't know when this adjuster was last adjusted. It probably wasn't adjusted for a very long time, if it's ever been adjusted since it left the factory. And this is why you have to remember to remove the circlip from the top. There we go. And that's the O-ring, one of the O-rings we wanted to get at down there. And you can just see the corrosion. It's not much, but it's enough to cause some drag. And pay attention to the actual washer that sits in there. There we go. So those are those 3 prongs we can see there, and according to the parts diagram there is still another washer buried down in here. There we go. Yeah, so this probably hasn't been along apart for a very long time. That is not, appears not to be a washer at all. It looks like a little spring clip inside there. So my bad for misreading the parts diagram. So there is an O-ring inside there as well as outside. I'll clean these off and blow them off for reassembly so that all the corrosion is removed, so it will go back in together properly. So that's all of the components that I've got, and I can't stress enough how important it is to keep this stuff clean when you're working on it, because you've got some very small passages through which the oil travels, and the adjusters are there to like this, to sort of, for example, this twisting in and out blocks and unblocks this hole. So if there's some dirt in there stopping this doing its job properly or partly blocking the hole, the oil won't flow freely around the fork, and your fork operation won't be as it's designed to be. So let's have a look at what they've supplied us in terms of O-rings. And I can already see there's a couple here that don't fit with what I've seen. There's a big O-ring. I also don't see any place for these small O-rings. It may be that there is something that I've not been able to take apart, for example in here, that has them. If so, there's not much I can do about it. So starting with this one appears to be this, so this goes on here. Just lubricate with a bit of the fork oil. And into place, so I can discard the old one. Now for this, there are 2 O-rings, the external and the internal. So those are those. So again, we'll discard those, and again lubricate with doesn't really matter, it's the same diameter which way you go on for this, so I'm going to go from the top. And this one sits just down inside, so a little more tricky to get in, but if your fingers are small enough, then it's should be perfectly doable. There we go. Right, and I'm just going to use the actual fork oil again just to lubricate the threads, so we can now put this back together. I'm not sure that it matters which order we put it back together in. I'm just going to copy the order that we took it apart from. Just going to do that up until it stops. Just going to apply a bit more lubrication to the threads in there. Now, I'm not sure which way around this should be going. I'm going to put it sharp edge down. There we go. And you'll notice just how much easier it's going back together than it came apart. Now I had it about the third ring, so I'm just going to reset it there. We can set the proper suspension later, but I'm just going to reset that there. So that is now done. That leaves just this small O-ring to go on here. So that is all the O-rings back together, and don't forget the circlip. There. So that's now complete. Now what we want to do is put these two refurbished parts somewhere clean and safe until it's time to put them back together, which I can't do today because I don't have the seals. So I'm going to take the O-ring bag, and put the unknown O-rings in there as well, just in case. I'll find what they belong to. And this is ready to roll. Now I need to do the other one, which I'm going to do off camera, and order some parts. So I've had a look at the parts diagram for the bike whilst I was ordering the new bushing, or a pair of bushings, and the copper washer for underneath the fork, and it showed another O-ring in that which seems to sit underneath here. I'm assuming it's supposed to sit down inside the fork. I certainly don't remember seeing it one in mine, but that could simply mean somebody's had the fork apart in the past to change the oil or whatever. The bike, after all, is now what, 98, 2000, 20 years old. So I can only assume that it does sit and it forms some sort of seal down here, but I'm a bit vague as to where it goes. We'll find out when we come to reassembly, but for that I've got to wait for the parts. They should be in stock, so it shouldn't be too much of a delay. But as I say, in the meantime, I just need to get on with a bit of cleaning and taking the other one of these apart and getting it ready for when we do have the parts. So we'll see you shortly, and that might not be until the parts arrive.